Hi, everyone.
And mid-shoe, but hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Good to see you all.
Good to see you.
Hello.
Hello. Good to see you, Alexander.
Good to see you as well.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hello, Diane. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Great.
Hey, Crystal.
Jasmine, are we
Crystal?
allowed to have the chat? If so, I'm happy.
Sure. Was there anything in particular that you kind of wanted to?
No, but before the chat was disabled. So
Yeah, we keep the chat disabled for the meetings. That's a citywide policy.
okay.
I'll give folks, I think we're still waiting for a few more people, but I will start recording now. Yeah, we'll give folks maybe like a minute or two and then we'll get started. Okay. I think we should be okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the August 24th meeting of the Social Justice Task Force. I will call the meeting to order. I was going to have Shayla lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, but I don't think I see her here yet. So Alexander, would you be okay leading us? I'll share my screen so that way you don't have to worry about, oh, I think this is someone.
Oh, I have the Pledge of Allegiance ingrained in my head since like second grade. So
Okay, well then.
No big deal. Right now?
Sure, whenever you're ready.
Perfect. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Shayla just joined. Okay. Let's move to roll call. Shayla Demure.
Here.
Krupa Desai.
Here.
Alexander Moore.
Here.
Shannon Morton. I believe Shannon's here. I think she's just on mute. Jorge Sephiroth.
Here.
Giselle Washington.
Here.
Jonathan Wilson.
Here.
Marcus is absent this meeting, and Daniel Zamilpa.
Here.
Great. Agenda item number 4, approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes, Zamilpa.
I'll second the motion.
Great. Roll call. Shayla Demure.
Here.
Oh, you can just say yes or no.
Oh, yes.
Krupa Desai.
Yes.
Alexander Moore.
Yes.
Shannon Morton.
Yes.
Jorge Sephiroth. I think that was a yes. Giselle Washington.
Yes.
Jonathan Wilson.
Yes.
Daniel Zamilpa.
Yes.
Great. Agenda item number 5, public comment. I did not receive any comments in advance of the meeting, but we can give folks maybe a few seconds. I did see that there were 1 or 2 people that called in, so I'll give them a few seconds just in case they're interested in making public comment. Okay, if not, we will move to agenda item number 6. We will now hear from the city's social services division regarding social service programs and resources, and you all will also receive an overview of social service utilization by community members of color. I believe I have made staff co-host, so let me know if you have the ability to share your screen.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm David Juney. I'm the manager of the city's social services division. I'm joined by Katie Egan, social services program administrator, and Doug Nguyen, social services transportation administrator, transit programs administrator. And first, just thank you to the task force for inviting us to make this report this evening. It's much appreciated. It's the first time that we've attended one of your meetings. And I also want to give a shout out to Diane Burby, who I have worked with for years. And so it's very nice to see her here at this meeting. So as Jasmine said, I'm just going to provide a very brief kind of introduction to the work of the Social Services Division. And then I'll turn it over to Doug and Katie, who will give the report this evening. And then after the report, we're happy to stay and answer any questions that you may have. We've been taking these reports to a number of different advisory boards and commissions and council, and it's really one of the the main goals is to get input, and this is a very likely place for us to get input, hopefully, from the task force. So as I said, I manage the city social services division, and the city of West Hollywood is what we refer to as a contract city. So we contract in social services with nonprofit organizations to provide the direct social services. So just to give a little context, the city of West Hollywood became a city in 1984, and that was at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And one of the first grants that the city provided was to now the LA LGBT Center for HIV prevention and treatment services. And since then, the city has allocated significant funding for social services, and it's really a wide variety of services, from services for children, youth, and family, to services addressing mental health issues, substance abuse treatment issues for our seniors. It is quite a wide variety. Currently, the city allocates approximately $5.1 million annually for these contracts. We currently contract for 33 different programs. And if I can share my screen real quick, I'm not gonna go through this, but I want you to know that, can you guys see my screen? You should be able to see the social services resource guide. Nope.
Yes, it's up now.
Great. So this is on the city's website. And because as I said, we want to get to the report, but I wanted to lead this to you. So this is a listing. We just actually, hopefully, many of you received this because we did a citywide mailing at the beginning of April. And this guide gives a list of all of our currently contracted agencies and programs. This is the first time that it's a trilingual guide. It's in English, Russian, and Spanish. As Doug and Katie will mention, the last community study and demographic study that we did for the city showed that the city's residents have a slight increase in the Latinx population. We have a slight increase in households that speak Spanish. So we've always had, as you may know, our largest ethnic minority or racial identity has been the Russian speaking community, but now it was slightly exceeded by our Spanish speaking community. So we translated in English, Russian, and Spanish, and it just goes through all of the agencies that we contract with and provides a brief description and contact information for all of those programs. As I mentioned, we currently contract with we have 33 contracts for various programming. So I won't go through that, but I just wanted to lead you to it. If you go to this city's website, go to the Social Services Division page, and right on the front, you'll see this guide. Hopefully, as I said, many of you received this. We did a citywide mailing, but if not, it's available. And if you need hard copies, we'd be happy to send you some hard copies of that. So I'm gonna stop that. Before I turn it over to Doug and Katie, we do it's a 3-year funding cycle. So we get into these contracts with the agencies for 3 years, and then we release an RFP. And the next RFP will be released in May 2022. And information that we gather over those 3 years really inform what we call out in that RFP. In addition to the programs that we will continue to fund, we want to know what are the gaps, what's missing, and that's really what this report is about. And getting input from boards and commissions, task force such as yours, we want to hear that, and that helps inform the RFP. For example, the last time, we're currently in the 2019 to 2022 funding cycle, and we called out, amongst other issues, but we called out we really needed additional programs and resources to provide for our trans community members. We had limited resources. We know that it's a priority population for the city, and it's a vulnerable population. So we called that out. We wanted to see if we could get other providers to join. We already had a contract with the Gay and Lesbian Center for their Transgender Economic Empowerment Project. And we were successful in, after that process, getting into a contract with Trans Latina and a contract with Trans Kin Work. So this is important for us to get input. It feeds that document. I'm working right now with a consultant on shaping the document and what we're going to call out. So I'll stop talking. I'll turn it over to Doug and Katie, and they're going to report on social services utilization by community members of color. And once again, thank you.
I have one question. What month does the contract start and end for the year? Because I know the data nowhere in the document does it say like the months. So,
and we have a little bit of an unusual contract year. So we start, Jonathan, October 1st, and we go through September 30th. So you will see we're working right now to take contract renewals to council. We take it first to the Human Services Commission. That's the body that makes the initial recommendations. So we're going to take those contract renewals for the 3rd year of this contract cycle to the commission in September, and then to council September 20th for approval, so they can start October 1st through September 30th, and then we'll enter the next cycle. And in the meantime, this year, as I said, we'll be going through the RFP process.
And just to hop in, for the purposes of this data, the 10 years that we're looking at, it starts October 1st, 2010 and goes through September 30th, 2020.
And I'll turn it over to Doug and Katie. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Doug Gwynn, Transportation Program Administrator, as David's mentioned, and I'm going to start to share my screen here. Let's start right in. Tonight, we're going to review the update on social services utilization by community members of color. And as Katie mentioned, this is between 2011 and 2020. So to start out, in the fall of 2020, City Council directed staff to study the social service needs of people of color in West Hollywood. In the spring of 2021, staff presented a report summarizing service utilization by individuals served by the city's social services partners during the 2019-20 contract year to the Human Services Commission, Lesbian Gay Advisory Board, and the City Council. That report included a summary of demographic data by service category, and it provided an analysis of service utilization by community members of color for that year. This report expands the study presented in February and includes feedback from both the Commission and Advisory Board, as well as data collected over the last 10 years. As David mentioned, we're Contract City, and agencies who contract with the City Social Services Division provide demographic information for community members that are served every quarter to the City Social Services Division. The demographics that are reported include race, gender, ethnicity, age, and household language spoken. And the reports received at the end of the fourth quarter provide basic demographic information for all the clients served through the entire contract year. So staff took the reports between contract year 2011 and 2020 and analyzed the different categories: employment, financial, health, mental health, HIV, sexual health, homeless services, legal services, food and nutrition, senior and disability services, substance abuse, transgender services, and youth services. This table provides an overall view of who utilized services between October 2011 and September 2020. A total of 92,417 community members accessed city social services in the last decade. Of the 92,000, 68% were white, 28% were community members of color, and ethnicity info was unknown for 3%. In 2011, 23% of those who utilized city social services program were community members of color. Between contract years 2012 and 2019, social services utilization by community members of color averaged 28.6%. It's important to note that between the 2011 and 2020 social service contract years, individual community members could receive services more than once and from multiple agencies. Because of the way that West Hollywood's contracted agency partners report data, city staff are unable to remove duplicate community members from the total number of people served. For this reason, the number of people served may be inflated due to the duplicate data. I'll now hand this over to Kate.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug, and good evening, task force members. Now that we've provided an eagle's eye view of the data, I'll go ahead and dive into the numbers a little bit more. This table summarizes the utilization of social services programming by service category between contract years 2011 and 2020. The first column lists the type of service, followed by the number of clients who utilize programs grouped in each category. The next three columns list the proportion of clients who identified as persons of color, followed by the proportion of clients who identified as white, and lastly, the proportion of clients whose race and ethnicity was unknown. Service categories are organized from those who had a higher proportion of clients of color to those who had a smaller proportion. As you can see here, the three service categories with the highest proportion of clients of color were transgender services, youth and family services, and homeless services. On the other end of the spectrum, the three categories with the smallest proportion of clients of color were food and nutrition services, legal services, and senior and disability services. Next slide. This next table summarizes changes in social service utilization by community members of color over the last decade. The table is organized from categories that saw the most growth in service utilization to those that saw a decrease in utilization by participants who identified as non-white. Again, as you can see in the table, the four service categories with the most growth are transgender services, employment, substance abuse services, and senior and disability services. The four categories with the largest decrease in utilization by people of color include homeless services, health and mental health services, legal services, and youth and family services. Before reading too much into these numbers, there are a few important things that we wanted to note. First, the youth and family services category serves a relatively small number of participants per year. Due to the small sample size, changes in service utilization by a demographic group disproportionately impact data presented in percentages. So although we have a relatively large decrease in utilization by people of color, that decrease represents a fairly small shift in the total number of people served. Second, due to how the data is reported, the differences between fiscal years of service were not tested for statistical significance. Some of the changes seen here may not be significant, meaning that a change in the percentage of people of color served over time could be due to chance rather than another underlying factor. Next slide. So we wanted to present this slide because at the February Human Services Commission meeting, staff were directed to provide a demographic comparison of the individuals utilizing social services with the city's population as a whole. In 2019, the City of West Hollywood released an updated community study, which provided demographic analysis of housed residents using census data. Looking at this graph, the yellow bars represent data from the community study, while the black bars represent data collected by the city's social services providers. As you can see here, the percent of housed residents in West Hollywood who identified as non-Hispanic white in the community study was 74%, compared to 68% of those who utilize social services. 12% of housed residents identified as Hispanic or Latinx, and 12% of those who use social services identified similarly. 4% of housed community members identified as Black, compared to 8% of those who access social programming. 5% of housed community members identified as Asian or Pacific Islander, while 3% of those who used social services did the same, and 4% of housed community members identified as another race, compared to 7% of those who used social programs. While the community study can provide a helpful point of reference, it's important to note that the demographics provided through the US Census are not always directly comparable to the social service utilization data. Individuals receiving social services may be different from the overall population. For example, some agencies providing food and nutrition services have a target population of older adults aged 50 and over. However, the older adult population in West Hollywood may differ significantly by race, gender, or language spoken from the total population, making it difficult to provide a direct comparison between the two groups demographically. Demographics from the community study are also limited to housed West Hollywood residents. However, city social services are provided to a wide range of community members, including anyone who works, lives, goes to school, owns property, or experiences homelessness in West Hollywood. Therefore, individuals who access services through the city may differ demographically from city residents. For example, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are disproportionately represented among the homeless population due to centuries of systemic racism in housing, education, and the US economic system. This makes it more likely that individuals of color will receive homeless services at a disproportionate rate when compared to the demographics of housed residents in the community study. Next slide. To give everyone a clear picture of how to read and interpret this data, we also wanted to walk through some of the data limitations that we identified in completing this analysis, and also talk about how those issues may be impacting some of the numbers. As Doug mentioned previously, it is possible for a person to receive services from multiple agencies within the same service category. So for example, a white community member could receive services from Trans Latina Coalition in January and then receive different services from the Transgender Economic Empowerment Project later in the year. This would result in duplicate data in the transgender services category and cause the demographics report to show an overcount in the number of white community members served. Contracted agencies do work with clients to identify and coordinate with other service providers, but at this time, it's not possible due to how the data is reported to allow us to identify and remove those potential duplicates. So that is an issue that we're working through. It's also important to recognize that partners that provide services across categories are currently limited to the primary service category for that agency. So for example, the LGBT youth program provides youth services, but demographic data reporting for the agency is currently included only in the homeless services category. So for that reason, each service category gives a snapshot of community members served throughout the year, but does not necessarily incorporate all community members who receive that specific type of service. We also wanted to flag that demographics data reported by contracted agencies is not broken down by services received or target populations. So some service category data may include individuals that did not actually receive that type of service. So for example, JFS Comprehensive Services serves both older adults and people with disabilities of any age. As a result, the senior services category is combined with the disability services category and includes data for people who are not seniors. Addressing these data limitations and gathering information beyond what we have presented here tonight will play an important role in our next steps, which I will dive into in the next slide. So again, as Doug mentioned, staff previously presented this report to the Human Services Commission earlier in the month. And this report, actually, sorry, Doug didn't mention that. He had mentioned an earlier time in February. But so you all know, we did present this report to the Human Services Commission earlier in the month. And then the report was also passed on consent by council last week. Input from tonight's meeting and from other city stakeholders will be essential and will guide this project moving forward. City staff recommend inviting a panel of stakeholders from other relevant city commissions and advisory boards to a future Human Services Commission meeting to review the demographic reports and provide additional feedback. In addition, while this retrospective analysis provides some insight into how social services were utilized by West Hollywood community members over the last 10 years, it does not clearly identify unmet needs or existing barriers to service for people of color. Additional research and analysis are needed to understand current gaps in service and disparities in outcomes, particularly among Black, Indigenous, and people of color. To address this, city staff recommend hiring a consultant to conduct a needs assessment focused on community members of color. A needs assessment will allow the city to gather critical information that cannot be gleaned from administrative data alone and present an opportunity to hear directly from people of color regarding their specific needs. An RFQ for a needs assessment was included in the item passed by council last week. Staff then plan to use the findings from the report and the needs assessment to inform the upcoming social services RFP and funding decisions for the next 3-year grant cycle, which, as we mentioned, begins in October 2022. And that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions that you have, and thank you so much for having us tonight.
Jonathan, I think I saw your hand before mine.
Yes, Jonathan, feel free. Oh, you're still on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. No matter how many times you do Zoom, right? So I read this and I was actually rather disturbed because there's 3 main observations that I have, and I just want to validate my observations are not too flawed. One, that there's only 22% of the community, West Hollywood community, that's considered people of color. So therefore, anything above the line of 22% where people are color, it means it's highly disproportionate. And that would mean that 8 out of 11 of these categories that you identified are currently disproportionately leaning towards helping people of color, which means there's a challenge there, a societal challenge. And then the second observation I had was that the priorities, if you take the sheer numbers and look at, if you just take the percentages and multiply them by the number of clients, the priorities that are for the city of West Hollywood, or the total population, sorry, or the population of just the white population of clients, is not necessarily the same as those of people of color. The priorities are actually different. And that was something I did just from playing around with the numbers. And then the third observation I have, and I just want to validate this one too, is that Black people within this survey, or using social services, are really disproportionately represented in terms of using the services, with 8% and 4%. So I just, I'm disturbed by this report, like very disturbed. And I just want to validate that my assumptions are actually correct, or my deductions are correct. They aren't really assumptions.
So Katie
Go ahead.
and Katie and Doug, you can correct me if I'm not providing enough clarification. But your first point, Jonathan, to access to social services by community members of color and how that compares to the demographics of housed community members. It shows that there is a higher, in some categories, higher access by community members of color than the actual demographics. Right. So to reiterate, so the 2019, that community study, that was census data. So those are, when you see that 72% white, those are actually housed community members. Those are residents that have an address in West Hollywood. And then what we're showing you here tonight is the access to social services. So it's a much broader group, because as Katie mentioned, folks who have a residence, folks who work, who go to school, who own property, who are homeless in West Hollywood, they all have access to social services. That's a much more diverse, racially, it's a much more diverse group. So there is a higher opportunity for a diverse group of community members to access social services, much more diverse than who actually lives here. Okay. So, and Katie, if you want to.
No, that's what I was going to say as well. And I would say too, relative to the rest of the county, West Hollywood does have a much less diverse housed population. So when you really drill down into the numbers, and I don't think this is included in the report, but just as an example, when you look at our homeless demographics, it actually tends to match up more closely with the county demographics overall. So it's a little tricky when you try and read too much into the numbers, just because there are so many different things that are variable. But with those homeless demographics, just as an example, it tends to match more closely the county, but also is kind of specific to the West Hollywood population as well. So we tend to have more LGBTQ folks who are experiencing homelessness. We tend to have more transgender folks who are experiencing homelessness, which is very West Hollywood specific relative to the rest of the county. So yeah, that's all I was going to add.
I mean, if you took the numbers alone, right? And again, this is just percentage times number of clients, you would notice that homelessness would be a number 2 priority for people of color, whereas for the city of West Hollywood, or those in the community, that would be a number 5 priority. So it's kind of it's an interesting, I don't know, deduction. So anyways, sorry if I've taken the floor too much.
No, I'd like to capitalize on your input just a little bit. When you phrase it, Jonathan, as priorities talk a little bit about that? Are you just saying, well, that's the high access to those services?
So my assumption, and this is where it is. So if you wanted to just do a straight comparison around what services are in highest demand based on what you've looked at, right? And you say among those that are considered community members as a whole, you would say homelessness would be 5th highest in demand, right? And I just did like back of the envelope type numbers. Whereas if you look at people of color, it's the 2nd highest priority in terms of demand. And if you look at those that identify as white, you will also notice that those are also 5th. And then also on the other side of that too, if you look at senior and disability, that is 2nd in highest demand for those that are the full community members and for those that identify as white. Whereas for people of color, that's 5th highest demand. So there's a difference in priorities is what I'm trying to say. And it's a matter of how we're addressing that is the question, or how we need to address it as a social justice task force. There are definitely different priorities is what I concluded.
I have a follow-up question / note that I think might be related to what you're saying, Jonathan. The numbers that are presented here, hi, my name's Daniel, my pronouns are he, they. For the numbers that are presented here, especially as they relate to budgets, I guess how are these budget allocated? And the numbers that are presented here of that, is it based off of allocation or need? AKA like if sorry, I just took a quick screenshot. HIV and sexual health, 35,000. Is that because that's what was allocated and we were able to hit those numbers? Or is it that's just the amount of numbers that we had as compared to, looking at homelessness services, which is around 6,000. Is that number capped at 6,000 because that's all that we had allocated, or that's what was needed?
So a little bit, hopefully a little detail that might help with this is that when you look at the large numbers of folks who access HIV or sexual health services, that's really pumped up basically because we have high availability of HIV and STD testing, and we have very high numbers of community members who access that. So if we and we can send this to the task force, we do a mid-year report to the commission and council at a year end, and that really we break down overall, we're not just looking at race, ethnicity, but it gives just access to all of the service categories. And the highest access number of folks is for HIV and sexual health services because of the testing and treatment. And I think what's surprising when you look at, Katie started talking about how we kind of fit into the county and how we differ from the county, is that when you look at age cohorts, the group who accesses social services the most are young men. And it's young men like from 28 to 35. And it is because of HIV and sexual health services. So some of the things that Katie mentioned, some things get skewed a little bit because of the type of service, where when you're looking at homeless services, it's a much smaller group of folks who are accessing. Those are, for the most part, those are services that are time intensive, and we have our providers are spending a lot of time with a much smaller group of people. So you can't, so it's difficult to kind of make that comparison. In addition, and this has been the priorities for the city and for social services. As I mentioned, the very first grant was related to HIV testing and treatment. And the city had, because West Hollywood was basically the most impacted community, certainly in Southern California and pretty much throughout the state, maybe with the exception of San Francisco. So there was always kind of it wasn't in writing, but the city and council wanted us to dedicate allocate about a third of the funding for HIV services or for services that relate to HIV transmission. So now you'll see, if you go through, and we're happy to send you the funding charts, and you can see exactly the agencies and how much they get. And you'll see that for HIV testing and treatment, that we contract with Men's Health Foundation, the Gay and Lesbian Center, Saban Community Clinic, Planned Parenthood. So we have a certain amount there for actual testing and treatment and prevention services, but then we include substance abuse treatment, because as we all know, that substance abuse can lead to HIV transmission, to mental health services. So that third, as I mentioned, we used to look at this, and council always wanted to see about a third of the funding go. That's expanded because we really know what contributes to HIV transmission. So hopefully that helped a little bit. Tell me if.
Yeah, I mean, I think any raw data that you're able to share would be wonderful. I'm a marketing data and analytics guy, so I look at stuff like this all day. I think as well, the other opportunity that I think as the council have is to make recommendations on where needs more funding. If there is any information that you can show, like, this team is always asking for more. This team can, has the opportunity to help X more people by adding X more dollars. I think that would be incredibly helpful information to have. The other reason why I ask is one thing that we, as the council, are making recommendations on is public safety. One of them being looking at, possibly defunding the West Hollywood City Police Department, reallocating those funds. I think that it all kind of plays into this, especially as looking into public safety and seeing which of these services are most likely connected to impact that the West Hollywood City Police Department might have on residents and people who frequent this area. So we're just, I think, both trying to look at a 10,000 foot, but also an on the ground view. So any other additional information that you can share would be incredibly appreciated.
Absolutely. So I'm making a little list, and absolutely, I'll get it to Jasmine to send out to the task force.
Wonderful.
Katie and Doug, did you want to add to my responses?
I don't think so.
No, I think you covered it. The only thing I'll point out, which I know we've said a few times, but the number of clients, when we're looking at these slides and we're seeing 16,000 for senior disability, that is not necessarily 16,000 individual people that we serve, senior disability, services for. Same with HIV and sexual health. David mentioned how these services are easily accessed and accessed by a lot of people, but also accessed repeatedly by a lot of people. So some of the numbers definitely seem extremely inflated or extremely small, but just to make sure it's clear that they're not individual numbers.
Wonderful, thank you. And I just have one follow-up question. In terms of communication of these services that are available within the city, is that up to every individual organization and every individual contract, or does the department as a whole of social services, are there also other initiatives to continue to communicate that these services are available? The reason why I ask is oftentimes what I have found is that even just access to knowledge about these things is impacted within communities of color, which I know, if there's some sort of like blanket communication tools that we can continue to push out to those communities, I know that would be helpful as well.
And absolutely. So to answer a little bit of your questions, we do, when we do the RFP process and we get the proposals, one of the components of the proposals that we want to know what their outreach plan is. The individual agencies, they know their programs the best. They know how to get the information out the best to the community. With that said, as I mentioned when I did the intro, we just did that citywide mailing of the trilingual brochure. That was a first for citywide mailings and for trilingual, as long as I've been with the city. Part of the issue with that is, when I hope you get a chance to look through it, is that there's a lot of information. It's a 24-page brochure, and the minute you release it, something changed. And so, you hate to send that out to the whole community, and already I called that number, but it didn't go to APLA. But anyway, so yes, the city does get in there. And then hopefully, as you've noticed, with various initiatives that social services takes the lead, or strategic initiatives who we work very closely with, There are individual campaigns. So for our homeless initiative, hopefully you've seen there's been a lot of outreach materials related to the services. And those are, to your other point, which I think we always need to continue to look at and address, is yes, we can create that 24-page brochure and do a citywide mailing, but are our unhoused community members able to access it? And even if they get a copy of it, are they able to access it? It's just, it can be overwhelming for any of us. It's so we're always looking at how do we get the messaging that's correct for the communities that we are trying to capture. So we continue to work with that. We continue to look at our organizations. And as you know, here we are on Zoom. So much of it is online. I took you to the city's website to show you that brochure. Now we did do that mailing, but we always have to consider that not everybody has access to computers, access to the internet. We do still need to do hard copies of brochures and get them out in the right places. So basically acknowledging what you're bringing up, and that we continue to work at that, and we continue to want input from advisory task force such as this.
Perfect, thank you.
So we can actually go Jorge and then Jonathan.
Oh yeah, I have a little question. I see that it's a big difference, between minorities, white people getting all this help. My question is, these people apply for those services? Some people being denied? Or everybody get it? What you guys do to provide with this service? They have to apply. Some people get it, other people don't get it. Is that why? Because I see a big difference. So it must be who is in charge of this place where people go for the help, Because I say because I come to this country as asylum. I remember when I came here and I started applying for different things for help. I remember they put me in this Armenia office, that they were supposed to give me some recommendations, some things so I can get some services. And I was feeling like they were putting me aside and they were getting a special service from other people. So is this, that was my question, everybody get the help, they deny to someone, other ones get approved, how does that work?
So Jorge, let me provide some information, and if I'm not answering all of your questions, you'll let me know. So as we mentioned, for the contracted social services for those various agencies that provide those, all West Hollywood community members are eligible. And a community member is someone who lives in the city, works in the city, owns property, goes to school, or is homeless. So if you go to the contracted agencies, they all have an intake process where they will sit down with you, get information from you, and lead you to services, hopefully that that are available and that are needed by you. But if you're West Hollywood, you are eligible and the services are free. So they will, if you go, for example, if you go to the Gay and Lesbian Center and you would like to access mental health services, you would like to get into individual counseling. So they will do that intake. They'll verify that you are a West Hollywood community member, and they will talk about the services available to you. They may, and they will, they might ask about if you have insurance coverage or some other, they may try to get additional payment to cover the services, but they will provide, nobody's turned away, and the contract, social services, assures that the services are free for you. So tell me if that answered the question or if you have more, if you need more information.
Yeah, I think that it need to be more, like some studies, to see, because like I say, if they approve it to everybody or they don't approve it or they just don't, like I say, sometimes it depends who running these places, so because for what I understand, when we talk about white people. We understand there was only five different races, white people from different countries too. So because I understand that it's not just because they born in America doesn't mean they are just white people here. They are coming from different countries. So it's not a group of people that they're getting more help than others, because that's a big concern. Because sometimes not just in this kind of places, it's sometimes even in your place of work, sometimes people get this more easily than other people.
Yeah, I hear that. I think that's why, well, that is one of the reasons that we're here tonight, because we want to hear this from the community. But I think, if I'm understanding you, the process for receiving services sometimes is more difficult for folks who speak other languages. I mentioned, English, Spanish, and Russian. There are many other languages that we need to have, that we need to provide in order to bring other folks into service. So we need to continue to work on that. I can assure you, I'm not sure if you're going this way, but for our services, it is regardless of any kind of immigration status. They are available to folks regardless, documentation, whatever. So that should not be a barrier. But I do want to acknowledge that there are still language barriers, and we need to look at how we can bring in, more accessibility for our written, whether it's brochures or as you mentioned, like applications and things like that. We need to have a much wider range of, language accessibility. So I think that's where you're going, and that's why this is the input that we want to hear from you and the other bodies.
Yeah, I just was asking because for me, I just think that what I look is for equality, so that's why my concern, my question, because I wish for this country and this city and all over the world, just equality for everybody. If somebody needs help, they should get it.
Agreed. Thank you so much.
So this wasn't going to be my question, but to piggyback on what Jorge was saying, perhaps maybe there's value in getting data around the rejection rates as well as the people that use the services. So maybe you can understand a little bit more if there's a disparity there just from the numbers, and that may or may not be valuable, but that's something. But my question really was focused on, I know that you're saying that we have a snapshot of housed residents. Do we have a snapshot, or can we get a snapshot of the different races for employment, the different races for education, those that own property and those that are, I think it looks like we have something for homeless, but the education, property, and the employment, because that way that would give us a whole snapshot of what the pool looks like. And even if it's just like extrapolated data that we have to make, a few assumptions to create a pool. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud right now, and I'm just trying to understand, has there been an attempt to do that?
So I'll start, and then Katie and Doug jump in. So we're presenting, I think part of it, Jonathan, that you're mentioning is, we're able to provide a snapshot of access to the service categories. So we can provide, data for, who accesses employment services, and we can give you all the demographics on that cohort of people for employment, and we can go through all of the various social services categories. Go ahead.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about, okay. I'm sorry, I'm asking for a snapshot of the total population of those who work in West Hollywood, or those who receive education in West Hollywood. So that way we can just see proportionately, we can create a whole pool of the population and see what proportion of the total eligible pool is actually utilizing services. And maybe it's, again, to Doug's point earlier, and to Katie's point, people might be using services several times, but right. It would be good to know what that total population is, just to see, and there might be some double counting also in that as well, right? But it would just be interesting to see what that looks like.
So to separate out, what services are folks who work in West Hollywood accessing? What services?
If I can jump in, I think what Jonathan is asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, is that you're looking for, similar to what the community study is providing, you're looking for a baseline of what the demographics of a West Hollywood community member looks like. So
Correct.
the demographics for everyone who could receive services based on not only housing status, but also whether they work here, all the other things that I have memorized but can't remember
Yeah,
now.
you're
Are
saying-
homeless here, all of those things. So,
Right.
yes.
If you're saying you don't have to be one of the 5 different categories, what are the
Yeah.
5 categories? What's the total pool that could look like? Right.
Yeah, to provide a baseline. And I love that idea. I would really like if we could do something like that. I think doing it is very logistically challenging. Just be able to access that kind of data and kind of sort out how we would pull it together from the different data sources. You know, the way that demographics are measured kind of vary depending on the survey source and things like that. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to do it thus far. If we figure out a way to do it, we will definitely bring that to you so that we do have just like a baseline of comparison. But at this time, it would be extremely challenging to do.
And yeah, and maybe if it's a point in time, like maybe it's employment this year and education 2022, or I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud, but all right.
And
yeah, but definitely see the value. Oh, go ahead.
If I could take a stab as well, and please jump in if I'm off on this. Like, realistic. It's not so much we would need to do one per year or anything. I think some of them are just not really available as data to even get in the sense of like the working one. We lives, works, school, owns property, and you mentioned there is the homeless data. We do have that data on residents, on people that own property, on homelessness, because it is out there. In terms of the workforce, whether or not we can even really access that and process that type of data wouldn't be realistic. But that is kind of where and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where we're doing with this. Like the next steps with the needs assessment, we're trying to find creative ways, just like you are, Jonathan, like talking out loud. Basically, we're like, okay, well, we can only say right now who we serve. That's it. We don't actually know who we need to serve. We can kind of guess who we need to serve based on the census data and the community study. We're like, okay, it's around those numbers. So hopefully we're not too far off on who needs served, but we don't know exactly. So since we can't just like pull data like from who works there and community members and put together this awesome data package, which I would love to do. That'd be the best thing. If we could just say, okay, here's the numbers. We got all the, downloaded everything, and this is what we need to serve. Instead, what we're doing, we're looking at, okay, we need to hire someone and have them come in and do a needs assessment and reach the community members in ways that, earlier we talked about how social services gets the word out about their programs, how the agencies get the word out. And David mentioned that with mailing things out there, we miss a lot of people. And with internet, we miss a lot of people. And those might be the very people who we're also missing in social services. So the hope is that we'll put together this team that is able to do a needs assessment and come back with something more than what we can basically find online, or more that we can find with our normal mailing lists and our normal reach out styles and patterns that we've done.
So my thought is really beyond us, right? It's like, let's maybe leverage the community at large. For example, ask, the City of West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, right? For their companies, from their company perspective, for those that are, members, what is their racial breakdown? I know if they sent me a survey like that, I would be happy to answer it. I happen to be a member of the City of West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. So I'm saying and you can always say assumption is that, this only represents 20% of the businesses in West Hollywood, but still, at least you have something to look at. I don't know the answer, but I think we can leverage the power of the community, right? As opposed to just trying to do it ourselves.
Thanks. So I believe I saw Alexander, Shannon, and then Daniel.
Hi, thank you. I'm Alex, he, him pronouns. So I also had a question, and this is basic, more focused on the homelessness data that you shared. I kind of wonder how, when we're looking at need, if you take under consideration kind of the community and the policing aspect of the homelessness, because what I find is to say we don't put as much priority or as much funds towards homelessness when the community actively keeps out a lot of the homeless population, that would come to social services to require help. If that kind of, it seems to me a little bit of stacking the data in the way of going, this is, especially with people of color, a huge issue that we have in Los Angeles, and we've seen it rising so much during times of COVID. But I can't imagine that, like, as soon as you cross into the Los Angeles line or the Brentwood line or other areas of Los Angeles where homelessness is, you can just see it when you just drive out, more prevalent, that those kind of have to be taken into consideration for allocating of funds. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense. I'm not sure if I caught the question.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
No, my question was, like, when you look at the data, do you take under consideration that kind of, I guess, bias against the homeless population that I feel, and not just from, like, I see a lot of people, even around me where I live, people calling the police on the homeless population, and we don't seem as, I guess, welcoming would be a term for the homeless population, which means, of course, when you look at the data of West Hollywood, you're not going to see as much of a need for homelessness services because we're not really inviting the people who are homeless in to get services. So then when you do this giant data thing, like, it's skewed in the way that, of course, we're not going to see that as a priority because we don't ask them to be included in the data. So I was wondering, when you're looking at allocations, do you take that kind of thing under consideration?
And when you say allocations, you mean budget decisions specifically?
Budget decisions, yeah, resources, that kind of thing.
Got it. So I think, David, I saw you unmute yourself, so feel free to
No,
chime in if you like. So specifically as it relates to homelessness, I think the numbers are tricky in the same way that the numbers for all of these categories are tricky. But West Hollywood, I hear what you're saying in terms of potential discrimination and just overall bias against the homeless population. I think that that's true in all places. Just the societal bias against people who are experiencing homelessness is something that's entrenched in our culture. But for West Hollywood specifically, we do actually serve a larger proportion of LGBT youth who are experiencing homelessness because of our reputation as a safe haven for folks who are LGBTQ and maybe have been rejected by their families and kicked out of their homes. So in terms of the overall numbers, it's really hard to say which social issues may be impacting either by increasing our homeless numbers or potentially decreasing them for the reasons that you discussed. So we definitely try and take those things into account and acknowledge the different issues that might cause folks to, number one, fall into homelessness, because there's a lot of different systemic issues that particularly impact people of color and may impact our homeless community members of color. But then also there's those issues related to being LGBTQ and West Hollywood's reputation as a safe place for people who are young, but also people of any age who are not heterosexual or people who are trans that may be coming here seeking services as well. And David, feel free to add on if I missed anything.
The only thing I would add on to what Katie said is we do know the city, as Katie said, the city has been known as a safe haven for, especially for LGBTQ youth, homeless and runaway youth. And it has always wanted to, frankly be a safe haven and to have the opportunity to provide, needed services. We have participated with LASA, the Homeless Services Authority, for 3 years. We didn't do it this past year because of COVID, but we have participated. They do what they call a demographic study. And basically we have our contracted providers go out on the street and do an interview with our unhoused community members. And it's very extensive. And a lot of it is gathering information on what contributed to their current, the situation that they currently are experiencing homeless. So I wanted to mention that because from that, we learned that, much higher proportion of our homeless community members are HIV positive in the county as a whole. Probably no surprise. But we were able to take that information and turn it into a funding recommendation. And we were able to get from that, take it right to council and say, we need to have teams that have HIV specialists out there on the street. So we do take a look at, who is out there unhoused, what are their various, needs, how do they identify, and how do we better address through our providers to provide services.
Alexander, did you have any follow-ups? You good?
No, that all makes sense. I think, and obviously because of what West Hollywood is, and it is going to attract more youth, LGBT youth, just naturally in here. I just think, and I don't want to take away from that, because West Hollywood should be a safe haven for those youth and a safe place to come and do that and to help get on your feet. I was just kind of wondering, if you take out that sector, which of course we're going to be a higher proportionate just demographic of LGBT youth than other places in Los Angeles, in the city, even in the country. It was just, I kind of already said it. I was just wondering if that was taken into consideration. But yes, I understand that you have to allocate more money towards the LGBT youth sector than perhaps other cities here in Los Angeles County. So that was it.
So I guess for me, I'm grassroots girl. I am on the pavement. I'm like, what do I do now? Where's the action? How can I help? And when we had our meeting last month, I think that they had done a needs assessment where they on homelessness, and they spent $300,000 on this assessment. And I'm like, we have 100+ homeless people. I think it could, I guess I don't know what the assessments entail. So I don't know if I missed this, but so, we don't have the demographics, or they're hard to get. What does an assessment entail for you all? Like, what do they give you that you don't already have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our thinking around the assessment was that it would provide us with additional details that, frankly, that numbers and administrative data can't necessarily provide. We are putting out an RFQ. The RFQ is out, right, David?
Yes.
The RFQ is currently out. So we are looking for a consultant who would be able to assist us in essentially garnering more feedback from people of color in the community about gaps in service and potential needs that are not currently being met by our social services agencies. So we can gather that data in different ways. I would like to also see kind of what the folks who are applying for the RFP recommend as researchers. But really the thinking behind it is to get more of a qualitative look and getting direct feedback from community members of color, rather than relying on data and numbers alone, because we do know that qualitative data is extremely valuable, and hearing directly from the community, as you said, grassroots, hearing directly from people's mouths what they need and what they're seeing, that's what's missing from this report. And that's what we want to help collect through the needs assessment.
Perfect. And I have another question too, just being like, for me, when I think of homelessness and what I try to do in my daily life is I've made a personal commitment in my life to do as much work for as many homeless people as I can. So, I think that in West Hollywood, you have a lot of the NIMBY people, it's okay, but it's not in my backyard. That's why we can't have showers at the MTA. That's why they won't let Black women lead, put in a refrigerator. So what I want to know really, because this for me is about action, what we can do now, what we can do. So what social services could do right now. And if you could do things, without an assessment, like fight more on food security, is there any way you could do something weekly, an outreach somewhere with maybe food, with maybe masks that's not maybe contracted, that we could get in on the ground and do it ourselves? I get that they can go take a shower at Saban Clinic, but I was feeding the homeless at the library the other day, and I was searching for these people because I know that they're being pushed around a little bit. But is there a way we could get these unhoused neighbors in one spot that they know that they can come on a Tuesday or a Thursday and maybe get a meal? Or, if we can't put in a shower, maybe we could do something like, they can come and, get wipes, hand sanitizer. What do we do right now? We can have a meeting like this every month and we're glad to do it. And those are our bigger ideas. But what do we do now as a collective group? What is our collective commitment as this group?
Well, I can speak to social services, at least in terms of homelessness and our contracted agencies. So we do have outreach teams who are on the ground 7 days a week in West Hollywood. And as part of their outreach, they also provide community members who are experiencing homelessness with, especially during the pandemic, with masks, hand sanitizers. They've also provided food, sometimes clothing. They are out there supporting people every day. And so we are very thankful for that. And in terms of like a one-stop shop and where folks can show up and receive services, pre-pandemic, we did have agency office hours essentially at the West Hollywood Library, where 5 days a week we would have outreach staff who would be stationed at the library and would be able to answer people's questions, connect them to services, provide them with resources. And that was extremely valuable. Unfortunately, that's been on pause during the pandemic. We are hopeful now that the library is slowly starting to reopen. We're really hopeful that we'll be able to reinstitute those office hours as quickly as possible. So we're kind of just waiting to see. Unfortunately, Delta has set us back as well, but we're waiting to see when we can open those doors again. In the meantime, I know that our homeless providers have also been collaborating amongst themselves. They do occasionally have a cell phone connect day. Accessing cell phones and remaining connected during the pandemic has been really difficult for a lot of our unhoused folks. So they will organize events where multiple providers will come together. They'll get the word out and try and provide specific resources or connect them to services that they need. So these activities are happening currently. We're continuing to try and brainstorm and think about ways that we can continue to improve those access points and make sure that people can easily get to them. But just so you know, that is currently happening on a daily basis in West Hollywood.
That makes me very happy. And I definitely, just from being at the library to pass out meals, I know that that's needed. So that program, whenever you bring it back, I would applaud you, because I know that it's really needed there now. So
absolutely.
Wanted to follow up really quickly, Shannon. The Strategic Initiatives team has held 2 vaccination events with public health in Plummer Park, targeting all of our unhoused community members. So we've been out there with the Moderna vaccine on 2 separate occasions with our providers and public health to provide the vaccines.
I'll also just jump into, sorry, I hold a lot of the homeless contracts, so I could talk about homelessness for a long time. But Strategic Initiatives is also leading the effort to establish a place for a homeless access center. So that would be a more permanent, long-term space where, similar to the library hours, but folks would be able to go there and access services and get connected to our providers. It's more long-term, but the library is kind of what we're looking at until that is up and off the ground.
Thank you for answering it. That's really great work. So, thanks.
Thanks, Shannon. Go ahead, Daniel.
Awesome, thank you. Just a couple follow-up questions. The RFQ, I believe is how you refer to it. I'm used to RFP. But the RFQ, who is that sent out to and how is that communicated out? And traditionally, what kind of organizations or individuals have responded to that? And I guess my follow-up question to that is, has it been traditionally white, or is this like going to people of color by people of color sort of opportunity?
So the RFQ that we just mentioned, Daniel, that we just posted last week for the needs assessment for access to community members of color, we're looking for a team that is as diverse as possible.
Okay.
So, we want folks, I mean, this, that's kind of the overall point, is that we want to be able to hear from community members that we haven't before. And we need to have, as much as possible, a really diverse team. We're looking, frankly, we post on the city's website. There is, if you go to the city's website and just put in RFP, you're going to get a list of, dozens and dozens. We're probably at the very top because we just posted last Thursday, and it'll let you know exactly, what the qualifications are, what we're looking for. It'll give a description of the needs assessment, that, our thoughts about it, but we really want a, consultant that can tell us how to do it. So this is a little bit different than the RFP that we'll send out for social services, but I can tell you that, we work with our contracted agencies to bring diversity, as to the teams, kind of to Shannon's point also, what's happening on the streets now. We have contracts with 10 different teams that are on the streets providing, what we call street-based services. As I mentioned, we brought on Trans Latina, we brought on Trans Kind of Work that adds, some diversity to those groups. But there's 10 different organizations that provide street-based, whether it's, traditional homeless services or mental health, substance abuse treatment, HIV and AIDS. And, we're always looking for what's next, what other service, it truly is, the focus is on what we call street-based services. A lot of the work is done on the streets, which is challenging for the community because we all know that folks see the same people unhoused day after day. We get it. And I heard you, Shannon, about the community is not always happy about that, but there is work being done with those community members. For some folks, it takes a lot of contact and work to bring folks into service, especially folks who are chronically homeless. So I kind of expanded, but we are looking for we'd like a really diverse team to do this needs assessment that we just posted. We're going to bring those contract recommendations to council the first meeting in October.
Okay, perfect. And I guess the method for communication or how that request is being communicated out to different organizations and different teams. Just for context, I work for a creative agency, so I'm in a similar world oftentimes of trying to, win business. I guess my question is, for requests like this that like a city of West Hollywood has put out, has it, is traditionally more, cisgender, white, straight teams, are they the ones who are typically more responsive? Is this an opportunity? Like, I guess I'm just curious in terms of how your industry works and this process works. If the proper tools of communication are being fed out to maybe teams who have never thought about working with City West Hollywood or would be very interested in this, or just trying to make sure that this opportunity is communicated as widely as possible.
So,
Hi,
yeah,
David.
so-
Before you
Yeah.
answer, I know Melissa raised her hand, so I think she wants to chime in
Sure.
on this.
Yeah, I'm just concerned we're getting away from the item that's on the agenda and we're moving into an area that we didn't put on the agenda, which is discussing how we create our RFQs and who they're sent to. I think later this evening in this meeting, you're going to create subcommittees that you'll be able to discuss those types of things. But this agenda item was specifically about this presentation. So I want us to be mindful of that. Thank you.
Okay, would love to discuss at the end of the meeting then.
I do want to just real quick to Melissa's point, I definitely heard that. But the recommendation from this report was to release the RFQ for this needs assessment. We took it to council, council approved it, it's been posted. So I won't go any further into that, but that really was the, one of the goals of this report.
Oh, absolutely. I'm fully on board for the report. I think I just want to make sure that for those who want the opportunity to, that they know it's available to bid on this, but we can talk about that later. Another question specifically to the report, as far as prioritization for those who receive services, is there a level of prioritization in terms of like people who live here, people who experience homelessness, people who work here, et cetera, go to school here? Has there ever been a level of prioritization within how those are differentiated, or is this just kind of a, if you fit the box, you're good?
If you fit the box, you're good. If you are a West Hollywood community member, you can receive services and receive them for free.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Were there any other questions or comments? This was a really great presentation and conversation. So thank you, David. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you so much to the task force. We appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thanks.
You guys are great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So let's see. We will move to agenda item number 7. I'm going to share my screen. So let me know if everyone can see it. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. Sorry, my computer just froze. Can everyone see the action plan? Great.
Just the front page.
Okay. Let me scroll down. Sorry, my computer's moving a bit slow. Not sure why. Weird. Hold on for a second.
It's always when you need it to work.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. So just as a reminder, I know that many of you remember we were missing a few folks at the last meeting. I'm glad to see everyone here tonight. But the community and legislative affairs staff just wanted to make sure that all of the task force members have had the opportunity to view and digest the action plan. So we'll briefly review that and then complete our subcommittee appointments. I sent an email out, but I just also wanted to remind you all that based on the direction from our city clerk and city attorney, staff was asked to put subcommittee work on pause. There was a new policy that was implemented that requires approval from the city clerk and the city attorney. So that is why we weren't able to schedule any of the subcommittee meetings and why we're continuing the conversation tonight. So really quickly, the Community and Legislative Affairs team drafted this action plan based on council's direction that the Social Justice Task Force advise the City Council on social and racial equity issues in the West Hollywood community. And that includes providing policy recommendations that council can use to address systemic racism for the city of West Hollywood. So this is the document that will serve as sort of a roadmap for us to stay on task throughout the meetings. As a really, really brief recap, we've had 3 meetings so far. You all have had the opportunity to introduce yourselves. We've had conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion principles. And then we've also received various presentations from city staff, including GARE, the city's Internal Government Alliance on Race and Equity team, strategic initiatives, who spoke about their multi-agency approach in addressing homelessness in West Hollywood, and as recently as tonight, the Social Services Division. So in previous task force meetings, you all expressed the desire to, or at least for staff, to bring forward a draft action plan so you all could begin working towards formulating those policy recommendations. So this is what we have drafted. So the draft action plan was proposed and approved, and it sets forth a series of actions for the next 3 months that are designed to guide you all in establishing priority areas. So the priority areas are based off of common themes and ideas that have been mentioned and discussed at previous task force meetings. Let me make sure. So these are the areas that we kind of touched on at the last meeting. And after much discussion, you all voted to approve the Economic Community Development and City Contracting RFP Process Subcommittee, which, quick note on that, that subcommittee will be kind of implemented in 2 phases. We'll make sure to focus on the economic and community development portion first. I know that our city clerk and city attorney wants to review some things as it relates to city contracting and the RFP process. So for that specific subcommittee, we'll stick to economic and community development for now, and we'll keep you all updated. The second subcommittee was housing and homelessness and social services. And then the third subcommittee was public safety. So last meeting, we discussed that the subcommittees will consist of 3 members. Each member will join a subcommittee. And the goal is for you all to meet outside of these meetings with staff. Either myself or John or Andy will be present, and you will report back to the task force on your progress at future meetings. So with that in mind, I wanted to, can everyone see this screen? The subcommittees? Okay, great. So this is what we have so far. I wanted to open it up for Shayla, Alexander, and Giselle to see if they have any questions, or if anyone actually has questions about the action plan. I know that for a lot of you all, we already discussed this, so this is just a review. But Jorge, I did want to make sure that you were still interested in the Housing and Homelessness and Social Services Subcommittee. I know you emailed me, but if you changed your mind, let me know.
No, I'm okay with that. I didn't change my mind.
Okay, great. So what about Shayla, Alexander, Giselle? Are there any subcommittees that you are interested in, or I can always go back to the action plan if that's a little bit easier as well.
I have a quick question. I'm interested in the economic one. What is the second part of that? Just so I know, I know that you said that we're going to focus on the economic SARC first, but that implies that there will be a second part of it. And I just want to see, because I read through the priority areas, but I just didn't see that part of it in there.
So for the second part, that's more so a city operation. So that, as I want to say, it was Daniel who was asking our social services staff about how we send out information to agencies, to nonprofits, how we initiate contracts. So that second part of the subcommittee is encompassing that. But there are things that have come up with the city attorney and the city clerk, and they kind of want to just make sure they do their research before we send you all out to do yours. So we're just trying to make sure that we focus on the economic and community development part, so that way we're still able to start that work. And then we'll go back and start to look at the city operation part.
Great.
Okay, so I think I heard you say economic community development. Awesome. Shayla, Giselle, any thoughts?
Oh, gosh, for me, I do homeless and housing in the back of, like when I sleep, but I like to try to stretch myself and perhaps build another skill set. So I think I would like to work on the economic and community development team.
Got it. Great. Thank you. So Giselle, it looks like by process of elimination, you will be housing and homelessness and social services. I hope you're okay with that. Feel free to unmute yourself and speak if you have any thoughts. Is she, maybe she, oh, I don't see her actually. Okay. All right, well, we'll move forward with the appointments that we have. Thank you all. I do want to make sure we have time to get to specifically agenda item number 9. So if there are any other questions, if people have questions about the action plan, feel free to send me an email. What we'll do is, or what I'll do is I'll send a follow-up email to everyone so we can start scheduling meetings. So that way we can kind of get the ball rolling with our subcommittees. Okay, so at this point, I'll turn it over to Diane and Crystal for a brief overview of their considerations item.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you again. This is an item that we are going over again. We went over, so for folks who were with us last month, this will be familiar to you, but because there were some folks who weren't with us last month, we wanted to just go over it one more time to make sure, especially as we finalize subcommittees, that the same resources are available, the same guiding questions are available to folks as we settle into the big work of what are the things that we're seeing are gaps, right, in services, perhaps in social services? What are the things that we're seeing need additional reinforcement in all of these presentations that you all are hearing? So we're going to go through just a few considerations that we consider or we propose when we're thinking about proposing new or advancing new ideas. And this document and these guiding questions, I believe you all already have access to, so you'll be able to use it as a resource as you work together in subgroups. So we're going to do that pretty briefly because we know that folks have already seen it. And though, if anybody wants to stop me for clarification, or to add any questions, particularly folks, if you were here last week and you want to say, oh, one thing that you shared last time that was helpful that you didn't share this time and you want to add it in, feel free to do that. But that's what we plan to do now. Diane, is there anything that you want to share before I get started?
No, Chris, I thought that was a great setup, and the conversation has been wonderful tonight and very lively. So remembering, because the primary product of this task force is recommendations, how do you ensure as you're taking in all of this information that you are immediately capturing that which will be informative to the type of recommendations you might want to form? So back to you, Crystal, to give us a reminder of the tool that will help with that.
Sure. Okay, it says that my screen sharing is paused and I don't want that. Give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. So the first thing that we propose as you're going through and thinking about what new ideas are surfacing for you, or what ideas you think need to be refined in some of the service provisions that you've been hearing, or in any of the content areas that you've been visiting, is really thinking about what is your proposed idea with specificity. Name it for where it lands, right? In this presentation on this day, when we're reviewing this report, this idea surfaced for me and it's related because, right? So being very clear about what your proposed idea is, who it would serve specifically. And so we saw in the data that there is a lot of ways that an idea can be great as a general pool or as a wide cast net. However, if you're thinking about an idea that specifically lands for a subgroup that we've seen or we haven't seen because of lack of data, that you're clear about naming that's the target, that's who we're saying we're intending to serve. What are the opportunities or needs that it addresses? So similar to what you all have been talking about, what is the exact thing for those folks you're thinking about, this thing that this idea will serve? And how would it work, right? So trying to think the extra step and thinking about, from the operational conversations that we've had so far, this is my understanding of how it would work. This is a great time to be transparent about the things that you don't know, right? So what we haven't heard about is X, Y, and Z, and we recognize that in order for this implementation to happen, we would need to know those things. And so that gives a little bit of roundedness to the recommendation that allows to say, we're not just generally putting it out there. We know what we don't know, and we know who we need that information from, right? So being clear that you have an understanding, or you have some type of grounding as to how it would work and who you would need on your team to get it there. So that's kind of the first step in sharing the vision. The second step we offer is to provide context. So recognizing that all of this does need to be connected to the role and charter of the task force. So being lean and tight as to how your idea surfaces, how your idea serves the role of the task force specifically. What would it require from other task force members or members of city staff, of city council? Again, just being very specific about who you're asking to take action on what, right? So naming that. Does it require coordination or collaboration with other entities? So this is a great question when we're talking about contractors. If you're thinking about, oh, I heard that this specific agency is contracted often. So in order for this idea to get off the ground, we would need some buy-in, or we would need some stick and carrot with this specific agency, right? But being clear that there are those other stakeholders that need to be engaged in the process or need to be accountable to some process that you're proposing. And recognizing how it connects with the other recommendations of the task force. So being really clear about hearing, even though you're going to be in subcommittees, when the group comes together and you start sharing out formulations of what you're working on, understanding what the folks who are thinking about public safeties are saying is actually really in alignment to what we're saying, and how can we make those connections solidify and reinforce one another so that there aren't kind of sporadic one-off initiatives, right? But thinking about those potential connections. So providing the context for your recommendation or your idea. And lastly, offering background. So this is where all of these reports, all of these presentations are so crucial, and any additional meetings that you have with folks as subcommittees where you're gathering information, being clear about where your sources of data are, where you got certain input from, what information, where you found information that perhaps you found in your own research. What is the need for action now? So what is the larger context? What is the county context? So we've gotten a lot of information so far about how West Hollywood relates to the county, relates to the state. So any of that reinforcement data that gives the clarity, that gives the clarity that's needed to understand why this is important for West Hollywood right now, and not just everyone in the country needs this, right? Or everyone in the state needs this, is helpful. What resources are going to be required? What's the monetary cost? What's the staff time? What are those things to the best of your ability, your estimations, right? Not necessarily to the T, but if you can offer them, they are helpful. They'll always be double checked by other people who receive recommendations. And if there's authorization that you can foresee, again, naming that as something that you need immediate action from, or you're going to need endorsement from at the front end. So it doesn't come off as like, at the very end, someone says, "Oh, you can't do that without asking so-and-so," right? But that person's name didn't come up until in any of the research. So we want to make sure that we're asking those types of questions all along the way for every idea that we have. Who would need to do this? Who would need to be on board for this idea to really move? And so those are kind of our three frames that we offer for you all as you are gathering, reworking, providing ideas, throwing stuff on the wall from what you all have heard. And again, you have them as guidance. And we're happy to answer any questions. And we also know that there are other things on the agenda that need attention. So I will drop it there.
Thank you, Crystal. That was great. And the only thing I would add to that, having sat in your positions and received so much information as an appointed official, is I've learned to capture the thought in the moment, right? In the context of this back and forth conversation, you all identified some really excellent things. Life gets busy, you move away from this meeting, you sit down to do this later, and that brilliance has escaped you. So capture it as you go, because tonight was just the right kind of fruitful conversation that percolated some really good elements that said, oh, here's an area that we want to look at more deeply, or here's clarity around where the gap is. Here's new knowledge of what's covered, which leads to the question, what's not covered. Really excellent conversation tonight. Back to you, Jasmine.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Crystal. Let's move to agenda item number 9, election of the chair and vice chair, which will be administered by the city clerk.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me meet with you. Your discussion earlier was lively. I enjoyed listening to everything that you have to say. So we are now going to go through the process of electing a chair and a vice chair for the Social Justice Task Force. And so what I'll do is I will begin with the position of chair. I'll call for nominations. If you would like to nominate someone, you please raise your hand so then I can call on you. Then I will ask for a motion to close the nominations once we have them all. And then I will do a roll call vote, and you will pick between the nominees, and whoever has the most votes will be the chair. And if there is a tie, so for example, if we have 3 and we have a tie between 2, we'll do a roll call vote for those 2 again, and then we'll repeat the process for the vice chair. Does everyone understand how we're going to move forward? Great. Okay, so I'm going to call for nominations for the position of chair for the Social Justice Task Force. Come on, somebody wants to nominate a fellow task force member or themselves. You can do that.
I'll nominate Jonathan and
Okay.
Daniel. Can I make 2 nominations?
Sure. Do both of you accept the nominations?
Yes, I accept. Thank you.
I respectfully decline.
Okay.
But vice chair sounds good.
There, see? Okay. This might go a lot smoother than we thought, everyone. Okay, do we have any further nominations? Okay, can I call for a motion to close the nominations, please?
Motion to close the nominations.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor to close the nominations. So now
Melissa,
I'm gonna...
I see Jorge's hand up. I'm not
sorry. I'm used to yes, Jorge, go ahead.
Oh, for me, Jonathan and Sheila.
Okay. So for chair, you would like to nominate Shayla as well?
Yes.
Okay, because currently we have a nomination for Jonathan. Okay, so I'll just go through and we'll go through the motion and second again to close the nomination. So can I get a motion to close the nominations? Daniel, would you be willing to make that motion again?
Motion to close the nominations.
Thank you. Can I get a second to the motion, please?
Second.
Thank you, Shannon. Okay, so now I'm gonna go in my squares. Task Force Member Wilson. The 2 nominees are you and Shayla.
Can I
You can vote for yourself.
I'm okay with it. It feels selfish, but yes, I want to go with myself.
It's perfectly fine. It happens. You're not the first and you won't be the last. So thank you. Task Force Member Moore. Jonathan or Shayla?
So I say, but Task Force Member Wilson.
Okay.
Jonathan.
Thank you. Task Force Member Desai.
I nominated him, so
I still need to hear it. Thank you.
Got it.
Thank you. Task Force Member Zamilpa.
I vote for Task Force Member Wilson.
Thank you. Task Force Member Demir.
I will vote for Member Wilson.
Thank you. Task Force Member Separak.
It would be Wilson too.
Going with Jonathan Wilson as well?
Yes.
Okay, great. And Task Force Member Morton.
Wilson.
Okay, so your next chair of the Social Justice Task Force is Chair Wilson. Congratulations. Okay, so now we'll move on to the nomination for Vice Chair. Are there any nominations for the position of Vice Chair?
I'll nominate Daniel.
Okay.
Task Force Member Zamilpa.
Any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Shannon Moulton.
Okay.
I was also going to nominate Krupa Desai as well.
Okay.
I'll decline respectfully.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Any others? Okay, so Task Force Member Zamilpa, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, I accept the nomination. Thank you.
Okay. Task Force Member Morton, do you accept the nomination? Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
I do.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll do the same as I did before, roll call vote. So I will begin with incoming Chair Wilson, Daniel Zamilpa, or Shannon Morton.
I respect both. Thank you, I will Task Force Member Zamilpa.
Okay, thank you. Task Force Member Moore.
Daniel.
Okay. Task Force Member Desai.
Daniel.
Thank you. Task Force Member Zamilpa.
Morton.
Okay. Task Force Member Demir.
Morton.
Thank you. Task Force Member Separak.
Shannon Morton.
Thank you. And Task Force Member Morton. Oh, you need to unmute yourself. Pesky unmute.
Daniel.
Daniel. Okay, so the new vice chair is Daniel Zamilpa. So congratulations. And thank you all for allowing me to step in and conduct your elections for you, and congratulations.
Let's get to work.
Thank you, Melissa. So I believe if you actually, do I need to turn it over to Jonathan for the rest of the meeting?
Do I know what I need to do?
No, you don't.
Okay. So you're off the hook for now, Jonathan. So agenda, congratulations to Jonathan and Daniel. We'll move to agenda item number 10, items from staff. So the one thing that I did have, I wanted to take some time to remind everyone of the absence policy. It's currently listed in your bylaws, and I'll make sure to include it on the Social Justice Task Force page on the city's website. But the policy states that if an appointee is absent for more than 3 regular meetings in any 12-month period, the position will be vacated at the discretion of the city council. And essentially, when you miss 2 regular meetings, we'll notify council as well. So I just wanted to make sure that was in the back of everyone's mind. I know that things come up, and it's completely fine if you can't make a meeting, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that policy, just in case. I mentioned before that I will reach out to everyone this week about scheduling subcommittee meetings. So make sure to check your emails about that. John and Andy, let me know if there's anything that I missed, or if you all had anything.
No, that was pretty much everything. The only thing I would mention, just because we just did the election of chair and vice chair, prior to the next meeting, probably a week or so in advance, we will also meet with the chair and vice chair to go over the agenda and get their input on the agenda.
Sounds good.
Great. Thank you.
And then I know that, Jonathan, you had a few things, a few items I think you may be interested in adding to the next agenda. So if you want, we can kind of just discuss that at a later time, or if you wanted to speak about some of those things now.
I mean, I can also send, I can attach it in the, I was thinking about the roadmap for the next couple of years for just the decision making. So just in terms of like how we're gonna listen and enable and then empower, and kind of what the methodology might look like. So I can send them a little bit more of a robust structure, something that people can digest, and we can just see if it's something to work from.
Okay. So we'll make sure to implement it into the future agenda.
Yes. Yeah, that'd be great. And then
I guess one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll update it prior to. Yeah.
I would say one additional question that we would potentially have is, in the action plan and at the last meeting, we asked for requests for presentations, similar to how we've had homeless services come, we had social services come. I don't know if anybody else has other ideas for additional presentations. If not today, that's fine. If you want to email us additional suggestions, there's plenty of other divisions we can have come as well. But as a part of the action plan and kind of the roadmap, we thought that it was a good plan to have the first 45 minutes or so of each meeting continue to be informational sessions from both city groups directly within the city, community groups, or anybody else that the task force is interested in hearing from, and then get into the other portions of the agenda. So as of right now, I don't think we have anybody scheduled to present at the next meeting. Jasmine, do we?
Yeah, so I believe at the September meeting, we will more than likely have Paulo Kesperdit come and speak about the BIPOC business item. I think that's what's scheduled for now.
And I think that the other item that will probably come, we could potentially do this in September as well. Council discussed at one of its last meetings, alternatives to policing. And so a presentation regarding that, specifically mental health services as an alternative to policing.
As a follow-up there, I actually had a couple specific items to see if they were able to bring to that presentation. The first is staffing. So again, speaking about how many police officers we have in force, how many mental health professionals we have staffed. The next is budget, just what that looks like and just costs associated. And then the last was, at least it's coming to mind right now, crimes by demographic and then crimes by crime, if that makes sense. And to see if there's any correlations there.
Sure. Jasmine, did you get notes on those? And I think the first two are definitely a component of the presentation already. We have general senses. In terms of budget, we have general senses. We don't know necessarily the exact budgets yet. That's a part of the studies that will be upcoming. But staffing, we have senses of that.
And just from a listening perspective to our community members, it would be great to hear from BIPOC business owners.
Okay.
And it would be great to hear from BIPOC residents. And then maybe also potentially BIPOC vendors that work with the city, that are contracted with the city. So that way we can just kind of hear from them, you know, what they feel is working well, what they would like to, perhaps maybe opportunities for us to enhance. It would be great to just hear their perspectives.
Sure.
Noted.
Shannon, go ahead.
Just as there's only one Black owned business in West Hollywood, so could you talk, if you're talking to like other businesses that would work, but there's only one in the city of West Hollywood, just so that you know.
Wait, I'm one in the city of West Hollywood. So,
but like Doge, so you have an actual business, or?
I have an actual business. I have people that work for me, and I pay taxes.
Well, no, like thinking brick and mortar businesses, like there's a retail dog store. I didn't know that there were others because of.
Yeah. I have seen in my office right now. In a WeWork. Yeah. There might be more.
No.
We don't know.
Yeah, on the roster, there's only one. So.
Shayla?
In terms of Black businesses in WeHo, my organization lands on September 10th, 1001 Martell Avenue. So we will definitely, we are Black trans led, so we will definitely be neighbors.
Thank you, Shayla.
Can I, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Alexander.
Just about the BIPOC businesses for the next time, if we could also see if we can start to categorize the businesses so we can see not only the demographics of how they kind of break down, but also what spaces they do take up within the West Hollywood business community. That would be great as well.
And I'll say that we'll try to provide as much of this information in the next presentation from Paulo, but in working with the subcommittee that is focused on economic development and community development, if we're unable to provide some of this information for the next meeting, that's some of the research we'll continue to do as staff for you.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, was there anything else? Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Sorry,
great.
just one question. As it relates to agenda setting, now that we've, not to bug Jonathan and Daniel now, but now if they're supporting agenda setting, are we allowed to, offer one-way communications to them? Does that still need to go through city staff? How?
It's typically best if there are items that task force members would like to place on a future agenda to do it during this time of the meeting when we have task force member comments. Typically a lot of with the agenda setting meetings with the chair and vice chair, if let's say we have 10 items that we want to hear on future task force meetings, we will usually work with them to prioritize those in terms of which ones come back sooner and actually set the agenda. But it's nice to hear from the task force members at the meeting items they would like to see in future meetings.
And maybe one, it's come up a couple times in prior meetings around like, is there a way for this group to make an action commitment or engage in the community in a particular, in some way? I know there's Brown Act considerations and all of that kind of stuff, but it does seem like there's energy around talking about that. So I'd welcome that being a part of it. I feel like Shannon asked a good question earlier, but I was thinking of us in the context in which she asked it.
Yeah, we can look into that and bring back a discussion of that at the next meeting, probably under the staff comment section. I would just say that, the key request from council for the task force was bringing policy recommendations to the council for the council to consider those policy recommendations and either approve them in the short term or the long term. So the really key goal is looking at items and bringing forward recommendations to the city council for the council to review and approve. But I think that certainly there's some room for also some action there.
Go ahead, Alexander.
I was going to ask, I understand that for agendas, it's good to bring it up here, but because we're doing subcommittee meetings outside of this, with either, Jasmine will be in it or you'll be in it or someone will be in it already, can we submit agenda items then if we have, because of what we've discussed in the meeting that we're already having? So it's not like we have to discuss it in the meeting, then propose it at the next meeting. So now we're not talking about it till 6 weeks after, versus like 2 weeks after.
So yes, staff will be in those meetings. And so if items come out of the subcommittee meetings that could potentially be on the agenda for future meetings, yes, we can work that way. We will have to balance the length of the meetings and how many agenda items. Mm-hmm. So that'll be part of the work with the chair and vice chair, is just which items are coming forward at the next meeting, which items are coming forward maybe 2 months later. But as a subcommittee, we can also, provide a lot of research and information to the subcommittee as staff as well. So if there are questions or items that the subcommittee would like to hear more about on their specific topic, we can bring in other staff from other divisions in the city or other individuals to help the subcommittee work through some of the recommendations. So it doesn't necessarily have to come to the full task force, but if there are items that are beneficial to the full task force, yes, we can take those recommendations from the subcommittee and put them onto the list of items as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, I know people want to go. I want to come back to what I was raising earlier, and I take really well the focus on the policy recommendations. I think the challenge for me is that, I really hear clearly from Shannon, there are others on this call who are really like boots on the ground folks who are out in the community and really like connecting in ways that are very important for informing policy recommendations. Mm-hmm. So it's less, I don't know how to frame it, but I want to create space for us to think about and strategize around how we get that pulse and understanding of our neighbors and our community in a way that will make us better.
Yes, yeah. No, and that is a very good consideration, and we understand that. So let us talk with the city clerk a little bit more, just to come up with some ideas of how that can occur without any sort of a Brown Act violation, and within the rules that we have to adhere to.
I was gonna suggest something just on what Krupa was saying. Perhaps maybe we can have people that serve the BIPOC community within West Hollywood. So there might be organizations that might be geared towards just serving the BIPOC community or emphasizing that. And I 100% hear what Krupa was saying. I don't know, that's just a thought. We can add that to the list of people we want to hear from. Hope that was a good and, Krupa. Does that add? Okay, cool.
Yeah, we can work to really bring back some suggestions of how we expand to hear more voices from the community and have the task force out in the community to get that feedback. But whether that's going out to specific events or having meetings or inviting people in, just let us work through some of that and we'll bring back some suggestions for it.
Great. Well, if there aren't any more questions or comments, the meeting is adjourned. Social Justice Task Force will adjourn to its next regular meeting on Tuesday, September 28th at 6 p.m.
Thank you,
Good
guys.
night,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. All. Thanks.
Bye. Congratulations, Jonathan and Daniel.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for
Congrats.
honor. It's an honor. Thank you.
Good night.